Welcome to the You World Order Showcase podcast, where we feature life, health, and transformational coaches being the change they seek in the world. If you'd like to be featured on our podcast to share what you're contributing to making the world a better place for us all, please go to www.jointheyouworldorder.com. Be sure to like and follow our podcast for the latest episodes.
Things okay?
Hi, and welcome to the You World Order Showcase podcast. I'm your host, Jill Hart, and with us today is Michael O'Connor. Michael is a humanistic astrologer, and he offers life coaching. He helps people become more clearly and consciously aware of their true nature, authentic destiny, and timing. This is part 3 of our, actually, I think it's part 4. It's the 4th time he's been back, but it's part 3 of how astrology is affecting us on the macro level. So I want to welcome Michael back to the podcast. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Jill. Lovely to be here. Lovely to see you.
So we're just going to dive right in because I know you've got a lot of ground that you want to cover today. And if anybody wants to know more about Michael personally, you can listen to some of the other episodes and we will try to link those in the show notes. So you can go back and catch all of them. And he does post them on his website, which we will also put the link to below. It's sunstarastrology.com. So welcome to the show. And the platform is yours.
Why, thank you, Jill. Thank you. You know, astrology is what I call natural psychology. It's really the best way of describing it. People have different perspectives, and classically, people look at it as predictive, but it's definitely that. And it can also be ceremonial, but its greatest advantage probably is its psychospiritual perspective. And, my interest has always been how and why it works. And, you get into a deeper reach of the whole story. So, but yes, as a natural psychology, the whole notion of human nature, earth, air, and fire, and water comes from astrology, but in a way, astrology can be understood to have come from that the nature of things. So it truly is the first science. Some will be surprised to hear, because it was the first aspiration of observation of nature in its dynamic motion, and in those days, well, throughout history, the indigenous peoples and so forth, the ancients, were certainly interested in all aspects of nature, but they were more holistic, we might say, more, the whole shebang of it and so they were interested, and they were observing everything, probably in part by necessity, the plants, the timing of the year, the rhythms of the whole unfoldment of the seasonal round, and which plants come through and what's medicinal and where, then they would see correspondences, right? So, and then there was, of course, the watching of the moon. So yes, it's all about observation of correspondences, which is where we get that word synchronicity. Carl Jung coined that word, but it's an ancient principle that he more or less gave a wonderful word to, I think, which I like a lot. But yeah, so we have this human nature, human psychology, largely because, we live on a planet and we live in a solar system that's filled with planets. And when we think holistically, we realize our whole solar system's like a cosmic cell, and the planets work as a system, a unit. Just like a cell is highly intelligent, and it would be silly to dissect the cell and think each part is separate from any other part, right? It wouldn't be like that. So all you do is expand your mind to the notion that the entire solar system is a cosmic cell within the body of the galaxy, and you're there. And at a deeper level also, that the whole reality of it is very conscious and purposeful and intentional. So right away you go, that's easy, fairly obvious. Like, the notion of randomness has got to be about the silliest notion ever conceived. right? It's like that. Talk about cognitive dissonance. The randomness of science, modern Western materialistic science, it's fading now quickly due to, thanks in part to the quantum mechanics of physics. They're like, no, 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 the mystics were right, sort of thing. So the randomness was just a sale of monopoly out there to, keep people from thinking. Almost, it's a bit of a conspiracy, but no, but when we explain, students come to astrology or astrologers wanting to learn it. And of course, it's like learning a language, but it's also like learning English lit in the sense that, or drama, because all the world's a stage and there's this whole dynamic of all of the principles of drama or English lit, which are connected. I have a degree in English literature. It's my kind of background in academic sense. So we would generally explain that the signs are the themes, the houses in astrology, there's 12 signs, 12 houses, which mirror each other. That's the setting. So themes and setting correspond. The aspects between the planets would be called the plot. The planets are the actors. So you wonder, well, in that case, the actors take a lead role in all of this. So there's still themes that they must orient themselves through and with, signs, and the setting is important, of course, and then the plot. So you can't really take one away from the other, but the actors are the key, right? In so many ways, they all are key, four corners of the same square, if you like. Now, so yeah, we can describe it that way. And what I want to share today is how we can move away from thinking about people via the model of astrology in terms of signs, which is the common, oh, Pisces or Leo or Scorpio. We can do it by planets, that we just purely forget all the signs and even the houses and even the aspects, although those are there in the deeper reaches of it, and just talk about them as planetary, like solar and lunar types. And when you do that, you begin to really see them. It awakens your mind very quickly. Get past all of the silly academic skepticism and just observe. We're supposed to, skepticism and science is about observation. So stop believing and observe, and you'll see, oh my God, there it is, right in front of you. We do not see sometimes until we're educated to see. Then we see. Like anything, if you don't know anything about cars, you don't, all you see is these four-wheeled things driving around. But if you study cars, now you know, right? You know a lot of things. So it goes on and on in every single area, music, everything, everything, So, and there's a lot of systems of astrology. There's this kind of debate among astrologers these days, especially the siderealists versus the tropical astrologers, and it's based on the zodiacs and this and that. It's a bit unfortunate because we're better off unifying ourselves, recognizing we all appreciate astrology. Like, for example, there's Chinese, Tibetan, Mayan, there's Celtic, there's Middle Eastern astrology. Then there's Vedic and Western can be called Greco-Roman, really, because, Western society is anchored in Greece and then Rome and then Europe and, all that Western world.
Do you think that's because of the difference in how the sky appears from the perspective of the different cultures or civilizations? Like I know I
No,
have friends in Australia who or New Zealand who have a different type of astrology because they're the sky from their perspective is different at different times of the year.
astrology is like language. There's all kinds of languages out there.
Mhm.
Okay, so there's not a language, there's many. So one can create different languages based on similar principles, and it should, in effect, work.
Mhm.
Okay, funny to say that. So, but people get into astrology and they get very dogmatic, like there can only be one. This type of thing is not, no, silly. You're wrong thinking. Like again, we just have to say Mayan to Chinese, Tibetan, Vedic, Western, they're all different. They all work. So stop being so darn dogmatic and
Mhm.
narrow-minded. But there's a lot of that out there, and it becomes zealous about their this one and that one. It's as though there's some satanic thing linked to the one that they don't do. Quite
Right.
silly, but it's quite popular out there. So yeah, that's the issue. But in fact, when you talk about zodiacs, you know, it's mostly what they do in the southern hemisphere. I don't know. There must be a system out there. I do appreciate that, but it's really the astrology, like even the zodiac, there's three zodiacs in West, like Chinese, there's even more than that. There's many zodiacs. The Chinese zodiac's different. The Mayan zodiac's different. In Western, or the 12 sign zodiac that we know, which is very bridged between Eastern and Western, and thanks in part to the way it was, all of these systems of astrology were developed in Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, and the Europe, and specifically Greece early on. China was always like China tends to be, all kind of on its own. They went in their own little direction, but they still based it on the planets and everything. Uh, Western, okay, but the thing is that there's a sidereal astrology, which is based on what's called precession of the equinoxes. There's astronomical zodiac. So what I mean is there's a sidereal zodiac, which is a division of the sky in 30-degree equal parts. And then based on a precessional cycle, the astronomers say, no, 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 the constellations are different sizes. They're not equal 30-degree sections. Western astrology came along and sort of reconciled the two in a way, and says we're going to go with the 30-degree, the 360-degree divided by 12 30-degree segments, but we're going to not base it on the stars anymore. We're going to base it on the sun's light. That's what they did in Western, like that's what the Ptolemy really was, the uh, particular personality. There's a family lineage called the Ptolemies, which I think is slightly different, but I'm not 100% sure he wasn't a part of that. But we generally refer to him as Ptolemy, and what he was quite a brilliant, astronomer, astrologer, and he created a new system. That's one we use in Western astrology, which is anchored into the seasonal round and the solstices and the equinoxes, and recognizes that there's a very consistent rhythmic every year thing. Okay, so whereas the sidereal zodiac, which is anchored into processional, which is this complex kind of principle where, due to the Earth's wobble, the whole starry background seems to, in reverse, orbit in reverse, like cycle one, and it travels at about 1 degree every 72 years, all of which comprises about a 26,000 year cycle. That's called a precessional cycle. So they're very gaga about that, very like as though we must anchor into the literal reality of that. And I don't want to dismiss that there's some relevance to that, but the thing at worst is that it dismisses the seasonal reality. It's kind of like it starts making, where Aries is the sign that's associated with the autumn equinox, it's now like Pisces is there, and it starts to get confusing at worst. So that's why it was, especially probably due to agrarian realities, that in part it was very, hey, look, we need to plug into the natural world, the seasonal round, because of the agricultural cycle. Admittedly, though, travelers like seafaring captains and sailors, they did have to adhere to the sidereal because they had to know that it was shifting. So
Right.
both have relevance and validity. it's a bit of an important background to
And
understand this. It's a bit deep, but there you go. There's the mechanics and a bit of the debate, but there needn't be because each of them work on their own ground like languages.
do you think that it plays into how the calendar was restructured, the Western calendar? Because I know different countries have different calendars, some of them, but there's there's
Yeah.
kind of a standard calendar out there that was, I
Yeah.
forget when it was,
The
the Gregorian,
Gregorian calendar. Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
was it was changed. Like, we talk about history, but history dates changed at a certain point.
Oh, yes, I know. It's very interesting that they have no calendar can be seen as absolute, but there's more
Mhm.
ancient ones will claim authority. But the Gregorian calendar, contrary to kind of a new agey sort of hippie notion that it's evil, anything that comes from Rome is evil kind of thing. Not really, because it's highly precise to the sun's light, the Gregorian calendar. Like
Mhm.
to this day, like it's just dialed right to the nanosecond of the okay. So it was a very the whole push of the Gregorian calendar was tied directly to astronomy and Western science. So it was very rigorous. All right. So it shouldn't be dismissed idly, and it would be very kind of arrogant to do that. People do, though, sort of a kind of a sort of defiant ignorance, if you like, not acknowledging it. There are different calendars, though. It's a funny thing, though, the Western, mystically speaking, existence is not as hard and solid as it seems. So we're co-creators in a relative like life, quantum physics, quantum mechanics would tell you this, all seem very hard and solid, but it's not nearly as hard and solid as it looks, and as it's experienced. It's more fluid. So we're because we have the divine in us, I would say, we're co-creating it. So we have co-created, shall we say, in a manner of speaking, reality around this new calendar. So the calendar itself is just Gregorian calendar measuring the sun's light and the seasonal round. That's what it's doing. Another branch of the study of time, it are more larger cosmology branches of astronomy studying precessional cycles, and definitely in the Vedic tradition, especially siderealist, that's called the sidereal zodiac. They're very observant of the movement, and some of them are very anal about it, and I don't want to say that's wrong. It's very relevant, but that kind of astrology becomes highly predictive. It's only interested in prediction. Western astrology emerged to it's very significantly oriented to prediction. I read the writings of a particular astrologer who would happen to be very, very well versed in both Western and Vedic. And he says the Vedic system is exceedingly focused on prediction. Western astrology progressed, sort of moved away from that hard line, which because it became fatalistic, it was
Mhm.
very, this is going to happen. And the whole march of the science of astrology over the centuries was to be exactly precise in a predictive sense. But since probably the past 150 years, maybe even less, 120, started to soften in that regard. And we became more, and this is in Western astrology, I would largely credit the probably I'm a humanistic astrologer, and humanistic astrology is sort of is founded by this particular astrologer named Dane Rudyard. He really is the kind of like the Carl Jung of Western astrology. Even in like astrology was pushed down by the church and then by science too, poo-pooed, just dismissed. But then it revived in about the late 19th century. And so a whole series of astrologers emerged, and they were good. They were good, but they was very predictive, and that was fine. But then it evolved, and what emerged was a whole new perspective on the psychology. It became much more interested in human nature, and we began to realize that predicting the future at worst is auto-suggestive.
Mhm.
So you start to now tell people things, but you're the possibility of making them believe that and then live fate accordingly.
Then they manifest it.
Yeah, so my motto is guiding your future probabilities and possibilities. So it kind of, that phrase is meant to honor both the traditional and the modern, but give a lot of emphasis to, hey, look, you're a co-creative being. You do have free will. The planets do incline. There's that old saying, planets incline, but they don't compel. Yeah, it is quite compelling. We do live by destiny, but our destiny includes our co-creation of our destiny. We're meant to use our free will because with our free will, our cerebral cortex, we need to navigate ground zero and the changing times and watch the signs on the road when you're driving. Whatever it is, you need to be here and now, and there's a whole social reality, social, economic, political reality that must be acknowledged, and we need to navigate through that dynamic. So we need our free will, and beyond that, it gets a little bit more esoteric when we realize that we're not just making decisions according to circumstantial reality, but we actually, this is where it gets really mystical, we're co-creating our own life within the dynamic. This is where the law of attraction comes in. We're co-creating. The only problem with the law of attraction really is that it assumes that you can be and have and do anything you want. So it dismisses your core destiny and becomes inauthentic. You start becoming socially influenced by wanting things that aren't really what are healthy for you. It becomes excessive or kind of Malibu dreams, if you like. It wants things it doesn't need or really want. It's kind of lost in a delusion, a kind of a glamour. That's the worst side of the law of attraction. It lacks a deeper appreciation that there is already a core destiny, but destiny includes free will and co-creation. So just don't, but they go off the creative cliff with it. You see what I mean? It becomes an ego trip. That's the problem with that. But on a collective level, we're also co-creating. That's why the Gregorian calendar works so well. Because, like, meaning, and the numerology, I'm a numerologist and an astrologer, and the numerology and astrology are dovetailed beautifully, where you begin to use the systems and you can then see the synchronicities of what they're revealing very accurately. So in other words, the Gregorian calendar has become the global standard. It's all the banks. So on the high side, all the banksters, all the big global power elite networks of hidden Plutonian power, in a way, are playing their part by contributing to a standardization. It's sort of in its own way. It's because of the globe, generally speaking, due to modern technology, we're moving rapidly towards a global village. Right. So we need a standardization of sorts. The danger is it becomes too dogmatic, but the high side is we're not competing with calendars, which becomes a mess.
Yeah, time zones are a perfect example of that. And multiply that by different calendars and a recipe for disaster.
It is a recipe for disaster. So it's, there's the issue of, in our modern times, the concern is, the emergence of totalitarianism, which is a concern. But on the high side, creating the goal, the higher goal is to create a global village where we all recognize that we're all humans who want love and life, and we learn to love and play together, right? And support each other and not be so darn competitive. And it's so this is the dynamic that's underway. But it's we're in these tense times right now, partially well, in the bigger picture, synchronistically, it's due to the fact that the age of Aquarius is about to achieve its sunrise moment. That's what I firmly believe. That's the most important thing to understand when you want to understand what's going on in the world. In the single most way of saying it, you gotta, there's what's called mundane astrology, it's the astrology of nations, but you'll get lost in a confusion of all these, every country, every state, every province, every city has an astrology chart. It's a real mind bender, but all you have to do is drive from one state or town or province or country to the next, and you will feel. You think that the difference of that little town to the next little town is arbitrary? No way. If you do their astrology of that town, it'll blow everybody's mind who lives there. They'll go, holy shit. They wouldn't believe. They think, oh, that astrology is just a horoscope thing, kind of thing. They would go, oh my God, you can see that? Yeah, and I've lived here all my life, and you have just described this whole city. And I'm going to tell you, if somebody knows what they're talking
And
about,
they have an arc, a life arc. Cities, countries,
they go
towns,
through their own evolutionary
communities.
cycle, woven within the moment that the city became a city, was stamped a destiny that could, yes, but each city is subject to each state or province, and each state and province is subject to the country. So it becomes so it becomes quite complex, right? And sophisticated, and good luck trying to come up with final, there are some who perhaps can, but it's no small feat to operate at that level of astrology. And it's not often one where one's remunerated. Maybe some, especially working for big
So which
companies.
mayor is going to come to you and say, hey, give me the astrology of my town?
As he blows a smoke ring from his cigar around my head, kind of thing. No, I'm just joking. Tell me, buddy. Oh, let me, I gotta make some moves here. No, no. So yeah, it gets very large in this way. And just one moment, I'm just gonna check something here in my notes. Yeah, it's quite a thing so we get the global village idea. That's the contextual perspective, the age of Aquarius. It starts by the way, and well, I have it down to winter solstice 2029. So we're about to go we're as we speak on winter solstice 2024 is the day. Winter solstice 2024 will create the 5-year countdown. We've been in the 10-year countdown ever since 2019. And that, if you think about it, you go, that makes sense. Okay, winter solstice, but even numerologically, 2017 was a 1 year, what we call universal 1 year, which is based simply on adding the numbers in the year. 2 plus 0 plus 1 plus 7 equals 10. 1 plus 0 equals 1. That's called the universal 1 year. You go back to 2017, and what was going on? Well, it was
It
big.
was the
Among them, one of the
global or
biggest
the
things, among the biggest
eclipse
things, guess who got inaugurated in the United States,
and
right?
Trump.
And look
Yeah.
at how big his influence has been. Love him or hate him, doesn't matter. It's, you step past your projections and your beliefs and your fears and your cognitive dissonance, and just realize what an impact he's making. And in whatever else may be said. So there's that, and there's the Me Too movement was big in 2017, by the way, and that gave rise, I think, to the woke movement somewhat. I think there was at least, but I won't go on and on about that. I haven't done huge studies, but I did take a quick look, and every year is a lot of events, but those were pretty pivotal that year. So anyway, we go back. What I'm trying to say is there's these 9-year cycles we go through numerologically.
Mhm.
So it's true that in 2026, so 2025 is the last year of that cycle. So there's an overlap. So in 2026, it'll be the first, it'd be the next 1 year of a new 9-year cycle that begins. And let me tell you, we're about to experience, because this year has been an 8-year. Look at the big 8 years, like the big tent, the big moment, the big drums, the big exam, the big moment, the playoffs, right? And look what's going on in the United States. For example, in the United States is always captivated the world's attention for all kinds of reasons. It's just so happened to symbolize something else that no other nation has. And I would give it that to the fact that it's constitutional republic. Okay, just to say quickly, it's because, and it's based, it represents
For the
something,
moment.
right? For the moment, currently, yeah. But that constitutional, declaration as a constitutional representative constitutional republic remains a reality that a lot of people aren't going to forget too soon. There will be those who, tyranny and monopoly wants to bury anything like that because of greed. It's kind of a sickness in my view, but what can you say? But yeah, so, but yeah, we have this reality of the rhythms of things you can observe. So 2024 is an 8-year big boom, boom, boom. And, and look what's happening, right? As we speak, with, Trump, for example, and Harris, and just this bigger than before almost because of what's at stake. And of course, what we're talking about is globalism, UN, who, digital ID, central banking. It's like, wow, we should be awake, everybody, right? Because the implications of it are immense. And so there's a real, this is the, I think on the high side, Trump represents a democratic aspiration. But I was watching something, it says, well, it gets very political, but the idea is that back in about 1940, the United States after World War II, it was probably after World War II, kind of protracted itself around the planet and kind of has taken a
You
position.
replaced England.
It took the position of the global muscle man, but the only ones who really benefited were those who were involved in the industry of war, unfortunately. So it's a real corruption of sorts, right? So I think what I heard is that he wants to get rid of all of that and just make America America, and not be the defender and protector of rights anymore, which I kind of like, I have to admit.
I
So
like it too.
it's, yeah, so, but the thing that's a little tricky is that like humanity in a way is ready for globalism, but at worst, it's guided by corrupt monopoly consciousness. So you wonder, where's the middle ground between the nationalistic pride and so forth versus a global thing? And I don't really know that quick answer, but it's somewhere in between. And can we have both? But the danger with essential currency banking, I don't mean to get lost in, I didn't know what we are going to talk about this, but I'll keep it real. But it's partly the whole backdrop to why I'm saying some of what I'm saying is so we can identify through astrology more quickly what we're seeing. So that's my interest. So these are pivotal times. It's very intense and kind of monumental, a little bit intimidating, maybe very intimidating for some people currently right now, in various places, right? I'm a humanist. I think all people want love and life, but there's danger in just free for all, especially because the way that societies are structured with tax systems and everything, right? So it's a big shove it kind of thing that we're being imposed upon at worst by a UN which is unelected, and that should make everybody a little bit nervous. It's like they're appointed by who, right? And that's the key word. Who exactly is appointing these people and who do they think they are, right? From the standpoint of democratic thinking. And then they keep boasting democratic. It's like, well, no, 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 wait a second. There's nothing democratic about an appointed body that is imposing its will. It's tyranny, actually. So it's one extreme to the other, and we've got I think humanity has to do what it can to find the middle ground as fast as it can now. Now the age of Aquarian principle is that it's carrying us into this. So we have this 5 years to sort out what is wholesome, really. And so maybe a digital currency is not the worst thing. However, what powers do they have? This could be very totalitarian control, and a lot of people who are partisan in their thinking aren't thinking. They don't realize, they don't understand. They're watching the news, the privately owned news, of not realizing, oh my God, um, if that happens, your rights
Oh.
that you think all those rights you think you have will be at least exceedingly compromised, right? It's scary. And so partisan thinking, traditional people, they sort of kind of, there's a lot to be said about loyalty, but there's also, that's exactly, unfortunately, what various networks, monopoly networks, count on, that you're just, they understand human psychology very well, and they understand that the cognitive dissonance will take care of the rest. You know what that means? The person will make the facts fit their bias of allegiance, of loyalty, which is honorable on one hand, but it's precisely makes them susceptible to being deceived.
And really it's a polarizing of people. It's like
Yeah,
we're going to have teams, and you have to be on one team or the other, rather than just saying, okay, I recognize there's teams out there, but those are actually teams. It's not one individual or the other. There's groups of people behind them. I think it was you I was joking around with, that you're voting for whoever is putting these candidates up, because it's not just the candidate. It's the machine behind the candidate that you really need to look at. And it's okay to say, I like this on this candidate and this on that candidate, and you don't have to be in one camp or the other. It's
yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's the polarization is the ancient principle of divide and conquer. And unfortunately, there's hidden agendas and unscrupulous networks of people on the planet, it would seem. So while on one hand we can appreciate a global village and a UN kind of environment, but as it is, it seems corrupt, and so that's the problem that we're dealing with. And how do we override the corruption? And the basic answer is strong nations recognizing the value of a centralized governing body, that it elects fairly. That would be basically it. But as it is, it's not like that. And so they're running hard to achieve their objectives. So we have to question its integrity, right? If we don't question its integrity, we're sleeping and we don't realize that we're like riding on a buffalo towards the edge of the cliff. And because we think conformity is civilized. And it's very silly, but it's very naive, and those it's tricky. So I don't. It's so some people. Well, anyway, they don't understand what cognitive dissonance is, but they don't realize that. But there's a big awakening happening, I think, and unfortunately, corporatism and conglomerate corporatism, meaning few companies own few conglomerates own all of the companies, and they do, we should be paying attention to that. And the only way we can really achieve what we want is through some justice system, right? Like we need law and order, we need justice, but even that's been compromised, probably due to threats and bribery. The old tricks, right? There's nothing new, but it's now at a global scale. So I don't mean to digress in all that, but it's all part of the game. And the Age of Aquarius is, just encompasses it really well. Um, Getting back to the astrology, the people who look to the stars, I'm like, look, the way astrology really works is based on sacred geometry. It's what you're doing is a form of like the cosmology of looking at where the stars are. That's a form of exotericism. You're too anchored in in sort of literally linearly, the literal linear. And it's ironic because the Indians in Vedic astrology and Western sidereals as well do that, assuming that they're factual. But I think you don't really understand how astrology works. I think you don't understand that the mandala, that the map of that the planets are plotted on, the chart, is archetypal, and the archetypal is the principle of blueprint that precedes the outer manifestation. If somebody doesn't understand that, they don't really understand astrology well, but they think they do. And they become linear literalists and very like, and they can't break free. It's like, wow, you just really don't understand. Archetypal, if you don't understand that existence has a blueprint, which we call archetypal principles, archetypes. You don't think that way. You don't understand. And the archetypal principles are anchored in sacred geometry. So once you get into that, then you become truly esoteric. So, but they're what they think they're being esoteric, but they're being exoteric. They're look, there's that saying, look at the finger, watch the moon, but don't forget the finger. What that means is it comes back to a subjectivity. So people take a position of assuming that their objectivity is absolute. That's an absolutist thinking, linear, literal, absolute, but they forgot the subjectivity. And you get deep into subjectivity, you get into archetypal psychology. That's what we're archetypal psychology. It's more woven within what really becomes sacred geometrical, and invariably by extension numerological and astrological all play in on that. It's like, in other words, when we look at the starry night, that is not astrology. That is not astrology. That is astronomy. So anybody who's looking to what's going on out there like that, no, 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 no. You're being an astronomer. Like, astronomy plays a key role in astrology. They really are like yin and yang together. Okay, so I don't want to underestimate the astronomy. However, in the nitty-gritty of it, the astronomy shares a factual reality, and it's really brilliant, and it's genius, and all of the high levels of intelligence that go into astronomy in all the levels. But astrology is when what we see out there is mapped. Only when it's mapped. When it's mapped, then you're having astrology, and the map is archetypal. And if you don't, they don't, but they don't, that is what most of those who think that way don't understand. They do not appreciate that shift from the astronomy to the astrology. They think that there's blurred. They're not seeing it, okay? So anybody who gets too literal and focused on absolutist, objective, literal thinking is an exotericist, not an esotericist. And it's, like there is this branch of astrology traditionally where people, worship the moon, or they worship the rising of Sirius, or they worship a conjunction of planets over a temple. But in fact, it's the sidereal zodiac moving that caused those exactly where they rise or to no longer be where they used to be. Oh, we can't move the temple, we can't move the pyramid, kind of thing. So it gets a little tricky. But the point I'm trying to make is the ancients were very reverently interested in communing with nature in this alignment-oriented way, which was lovely. Okay, but it still was exoteric. You understand the difference between exoteric and esoteric, and it was invariably time stamped. It couldn't last. That exoteric, it's always subject to change, but the esoteric is not subject to change. Okay, this
It
is
seems like
important.
it would be the opposite, but okay.
No, the exoteric is like the fact that the Earth spins on its axis, orbits around the sun very quickly, and the whole galaxy is turning, but the Earth turning on its axis is theoretically the popular consensus belief. There's a couple of other theories that why we're experiencing the whole night sky to appear very slowly, 1 degree every 72 years, to shift. Very incremental, right? So, but the esoteric means the core archetypal principles, they are not changing. And that's the thing right there. When you understand that, you go, cool. Like, in other words, the planets won't change their characteristics no matter what else is going on with the so-called zodiacs. So even the zodiac, you see what I'm trying to explain about the zodiac is the zodiac is an arbitrary construct. It's not real. It's a framework. It's not got objective reality like we think it does. And Chinese and Tibetan and Mayan astrology are proof positive that it does not. They go, no, we have a different zodiac completely. And our astrology system works. Thank you very much. But what we all agree on, all the systems, is the planets. That we all agree on. And how Chinese astrology doesn't do aspects like Western, and Vedic and Western don't do aspects quite the same as others. And the Mayan does a whole other trip, okay, to say. So when you realize that, you wipe out the zodiac and you come back to the core essence of astrology, which is the relationship of the planets. Okay, now this is tricky. The relationship of the planets, forget about zodiacs, just forget about all that, forget about even seasons. But when you want to really understand the planets astrologically, you've got to plot them on a chart. Even if you got rid of if you put a circle on the table and you got rid of all the so-called division of the sky by 12, which is the zodiac, and you look at the relationship between the planets, you would have all you need. You wouldn't need the zodiac. This is really important to understand. You would go, oh my God, you can tell there's a relationship? Yep. If you did want to get a little bit more objective, you might get a starting point of the circle. It's true. And Western astrology says, well, why don't we deal with the new moon? Or why don't we deal with a winter solstice or a solstice? So that's the kind of principle it works on. But really, it's the esotericism of the archetypal principles behind the outer manifestation. When you understand that's what Plato is all about. That's what Plato is all about. He was an esotericist, and he talked all the time about the inner blueprint. And he wasn't the only one. He was just the Johnny come lately. It was already well known what he was doing. He was a brilliant student of the mystery schools that preceded him by thousands of years. Truly, the Mesopotamians, the Egyptians, the Indians, the Kush Valley, and the Chinese, and even the early Greeks. Okay, so he came along. He was not millennia before the early Greeks, but centuries later. So he was just brilliant enough to see it all, but didn't originate anything as such. Just a darn aware person. So, but anyway, he was all into the blueprint. And that's what I'm talking about. When you get mapping it out, you get closer to the blueprint. Otherwise, you're just lost in an exoteric perspective of which was basically called phenomenology. It's really, the language is a little bit hard to understand these things at first. It's not like one should just understand everything I'm saying that quickly. But it's interesting. The difference between understanding exoteric and esoteric is quite a big study.
So does this apply more towards nations or individuals? I'm a little lost here.
Even all like astrology's, see, we're co-creative beings. We're co-creative beings. Okay, so we're not just in the world and in existence and in nature. We are nature. We are okay. Esotericism is that there ultimately are no divisions, no separations. It's all one big oneness, one big goddess, one big God, one big whole, one big everything, right? So that's where you get closer to the esoteric, but you realize that outer reality comes from inner reality. Just like your laptop, very sophisticated machine, has layers and layers and layers of knowledge and technology behind it. The behind is what esoteric means. What's behind, or that's what occult means. What's behind that? Esoteric means what's in there. What in there is similar to the words why they couple occult and esoteric, because what's behind it means what's in it, which means layers and layers and layers and layers of knowledge. But so a laptop, in a way, a computer, is like a multi-dimensional thing, just like a television is. Any technology of that sort is like multi-dimensional. You see where I'm going? Like it
So,
includes electricity, radio waves,
so
wave.
we're equating this to planets and how they function together, though separate. They're the technology for.
The planets are observing the planets, ironically, is a kind of exotericism, because the planets have a design. No,
Mhm.
no, what I mean is the whole of existence is designed. It's got an archetypal blueprint. The very fact that a planet is a sphere is based on an archetypal principle. That means that there's a esoteric means, why is the planet, or are the planets and the moons and so forth, spherical? Why? Don't take that for granted. It's based on laws of nature. And the laws of nature, you go, well, why is there a law of nature? And then it goes, well, that's because there's, intelligence. Oh, why are there the shape of everything in existence the way it is? And why does the shape of things in existence have parallels with other things? Okay, you start getting to that world. That's what the sacred geometry world does. It sees the parallels, and then it starts going, well, and on one hand, it can go into mathematical principles, but mathematics is only a language, brilliant as it may be, but it's a kind of its own limitation. And that's where you get into the deep esoteric, which is that the outer existence, the whole universe, esoterically, according to the ancients and even modern science will demonstrate, sound creates shape. So the idea is that there's the inner dimensions can be called higher dimensions, and they're at the core is sound, which is what they get into this. There's this whole principle of what's called the sounding light. It's quite something when you get into this level of esotericism. You're really into the essence of what would be called spiritual science. That's what spiritual science is. It's about, it's all one, it's unified, it's intelligent, it's on purpose, it's intentional. So you get into this God thing. It's okay, by design, on purpose, intentional, loving, has to be loving because it made it beautiful. And it's creative. So you get into this, when you get into spiritual science like that, it's no longer gaga guru or believing. You start to go, oh my God, it's like, where isn't God? It's all one, it's all whole. But the blueprint of it, when you understand that any construction of anything, houses, buildings, cars, computers, whatever, invariably has a schemata, a design based on very factual, intelligent principles, which then at their deepest root have law. If we're going to talk about in science or any branch of human study law, we must acknowledge intelligence. Everything else is a grand illusion. It's like it's a form of cognitive dissonance. It's like, oh well, it's kind of just happened. It's like, no, no. Computers don't put themselves together on their own arbitrarily, and this is a computer. But the computer, interestingly enough, processes information that in modern technology is like the internet, and the internet parallels, approximates the mind. So the misunderstanding of a more literal minded person is that the brain is the mind. Wrong. Wrong. Absolutely wrong. The mind is not the brain. Brain, process, mind, intelligence field. And that's where it gets very interesting, very exciting. Now we are kind of creating God on the planet with, and it's not wrong, and it's kind of wonderful at some level, right? Because we have like the internet and we have the cloud and the information is held. That's just a parallel to the interdimensional model. So we've exoterically made the principles of the laws of nature manifest through technology, but the technology is subject to its own limitation. Do you know what that is? Electricity. And
Another waveform in its own.
everything's kind of so this is where it gets into the, well, you wonder what's, the satellites have a,
Ultimately humans are bound by the same barrier, for lack of a better word. Humans are based on electricity too. Once your heart stops pumping, it's an electrical impulse. That is the spark of life, is the thing that keeps us mechanically working.
yeah,
It is.
electromagnetic.
Mhm.
Right. I agree with you. the electromagnetic spark. So that's where you go, is the electromagnetic spark random? That's the deep question. And it's a very assumptive thing to sweep it away and say it's random. When you go into the deeper principles and implications, you kind of go, no, it can't be. So that's where we get into a place where we humble out and realize there is higher intelligence within or behind that esoteric and occult, those words,
Mhm.
within and behind, which become God. Even, that's where we can talk about God, but we can't describe it. We can see all the evidence of it. So, but I mean, you don't need to be blubbery about it. You don't have to get, oh, like, give me a hug. God, okay, let's hug each other, or let's kind of pray. Lovely as those moments can be, no, you just go, yep, there's no doubt about it. There's a higher intelligent, purposeful, intentional, creative, loving, loving because we feel love, and loving because it's beautiful.
And it's
So,
always flowing through you because we don't actually exist. If you're talking about, the computer and the cloud and stuff, but as as physical things, a physical thing is a collection of ultimately atoms, which are also a collection of even smaller particles
yes.
that exist and don't exist all at the same time.
Right, it gets very paradoxical, exactly, and that's because principles of energy, vibration, frequency, and what we, like Western science, for example, or materialistic science is based on empiricism, but the empirical perceptual apparatus is highly limited. It's like it sees about 1% of existence. So we're basing our, like, it's a real snow job. It's a real, like bowl them over with, let's baffle them with bull, right? Like, you're
Mhm.
baffling us with bull. So don't give me like you're a scientist and it's based on empiricism. It's like, it's elementary to start talking about the spectrums of reality that empiricism cannot see. So what are you talking about? What exactly is the ground of your authority? Right? There is no real ground. What there is evidence to anybody who's willing to observe beyond their conditioned perceptions. And it's right in front of you. It's a kind of duh moment when you realize, of course, the design of nature reveals the intention of an inner impulse. And to think it's random and arbitrary is about as big a backdoor kind of BS. It couldn't even be larger. It's a form of hocus pocus. It's like, you can't really, that's an unintelligent thing you're saying there. I would say to a person, don't, I'm sure you're bright. What you just said is a clear demonstration of cognitive dissonance, that you are making it arbitrary and random because you were told that that's what it is, but it's right in front of you that it cannot be. It's just, the silliest thing you can possibly say. It's about as dumb as it gets to begin, but that's been a sort of a smoke and mirror thing to keep every. It's kind of, quite frankly, dark force wants to keep people away from the light, and light is the light of awareness, which means the realization of God. So light force, satanic energy, Satan, if you like, or satanic force, is division, separation. That's, and okay, it's division, separation, and attachment simultaneously. It's so attached that it wants to use division and separation to throw anything else off of its attachment. So it's the division and separation are like tactical, whereas the attachment is the compelling force that causes tyranny. And really, it's basically, when you get into spiritual language, it's fearful, addicted. It's actually a disease. Attachment is a form of spiritual disease. So the world is plagued by a spiritual disease.
I look at it as kind
Basically,
of like cancer in
yeah,
our in a body. It's
yeah,
cancer is not bad or good. It's just a response to an environment. And
yeah.
and it happens in the macro as well, in that we we interact with each other, but there is this malevolence that exists counter to the light for whatever reason. And there is it's a response to an environment as well. We we create, as our co-creating, we're always creating situations, and it's not, I don't really think that there's good and bad. I do believe evil exists, but I don't think it's like it labeling things good or bad doesn't really help a situation. It's how to move towards the light and away from the situations that create uh, an environment that allows the malevolence to exist. Does that make
You
sense?
know, in duality, we have polarity. That's the basic principle of duality, is polarity. Polarity is
Mhm.
yin yang, light, dark, up, down, here, there, you, I, us, them, if you like.
Mhm.
Okay, it creates this separation reality that is part of the experiential reality. So we can't deny that
Mhm.
our experience is here, there, up, down, you, I, us, them. And that's just, but beyond, at deeper levels, you begin to realize that those divisions dissolve. They increasingly become fields, one woven within the other, if you like, or layers and fields, etc. But the attachment of, like, that's exactly the point. In duality, attachment to control is, or control isn't really what they're attached to. It's really attachment to the notion that the thing that they're attached to, which is generally power, generally, is, because the sickness is that it thinks that it's limited.
Mhm.
It's scarce, it's precious, right? And scarce and precious, and must be,
Held
and
on to.
so then, so that creates a compulsive, addictive, neurotic, if you want, insanity that uses division and separation all as its tactical endeavor, and other things, bribery and coercion, for example. It uses tactical measures to protect its attachment. So it's a kind of, yeah, it's a spiritual sickness that we're all contending with on the planet. However else it may be said, whoever may be described as involved, that attachment means those who are sick like that are what would be described as in a hell state of meaning low vibration,
Mhm.
uh, inability to feel, there's no love, there's no empathy, there's no compassion. It's just sheer compulsion. So, and it's plays, it creates its own vortex. It creates its own, that's what they mean by satanic. I'm not saying have a horned devil,
No,
just a
it's energy.
satan. Yeah, satan, yes, energetic. So that's where humanity's at. So we're at that place. So, this, yeah, this human condition thing, the age of Aquarius, where we're at, um, astrology, cosmology, esotericism, exotericism, all this language is okay. It's there you go, everybody. Listen to it, think about it, go in there. The irony is one of the ways of healing the sickness is through empathy and compassion, to realize that in a way they are us and we're all in this together. And that's a tough one. That's a tough one because the insanity, the fear, what really is the fear, is frightening, and it's also despicable in a way. It's antics, it's tactical reaction is despicable because it lacks any morality, compassion, ethical, um, anything.
In
It's
a
just,
way, it's our job to look for the good, to look for the positive,
yeah.
and to draw on that. And the more that as a society we can look for the light and the things that we see darkness in, the more we'll draw that light out and the darkness will recede back.
Yes, indeed. It's we get into language like balance and the duality and polarity. We want to balance in a manner of speaking the light and the dark, which is a little ironic, but the balance is like in the body, homeostasis. There is no compulsion, there is no attachment, there is no cancer. In homeostasis in the body, there can be no disease. So it's the balance of the acid and alkaline. That's a very important, significant principle of duality, acid and alkaline. And when they're balanced, no disease can occur. So what's basically occurred is we become predominantly acid. And in an acid environment, toxic acid environment, cancer will thrive. It'll become turbo. For example, it'll be highly like, and it's just the cancer in a way is trying to replicate the error. Probably, I mean, I'm generally understanding, I'm not a biologist, but I
Mhm.
basically imagine that the cells are alerted in an absolute extreme emergency sense, and so they're trying to fight. So it's become just like the world, as you said, Jill. The cancer is where we're going to annihilate ourselves. Is the problem, but so we collectively now have the responsibility to awaken to the fact that we humanity are sick. There's like, and but it's the sickness is manifesting in various networks of people who happen to obsessively have the power based on the attachment. So it's real tricky. We're in a real pickle.
So
And
let's
but you
circle
said it.
back to astrology here for just another
Yeah.
maybe
Let's,
5 minutes. But
okay.
what what do the planets say about what's coming? I realize we're ending the age of Aquarius and we're going into a new age, or
I'll keep it.
no,
Okay. Yeah.
we're leaving the age of Pisces and we're going into Aquarius. I got that backwards. Um, what does that say for humanity as a whole?
Well, first of all, the story of the Age of Aquarius is a little bit more complex than that. The Age of Aquarius, believe it or not, started about 500 years ago, but we haven't had the sunrise. We had the midnight, we had the nighttime period because
Mhm.
the day starts at midnight. It's dark until sunrise. That's kind of part of the story there. But the planetary, but the Age of Aquarius, there's every good indication that it's accurate to talk about it. as the age of Aquarius, and that timeline that I mentioned, it looks extremely accurate, and all the synchronicities are there. And we will see over the next 5 years, it will more or less prove it. Planetary wise, in Western astrology, we're on the verge of a lot of very dynamic, rapid changes. It's almost like I can only say it. It's kind of intimidating to think about at some level. I don't mean to frighten anybody, but it's like that. We're like all like the far planets currently are all in difficult signs. Like Saturn's in Pisces is difficult. Jupiter's in Gemini, that's difficult. Uranus is in Taurus, it's difficult. Pluto is in Capricorn currently, but it's been in Aquarius and will be back in Aquarius on the 19th of November. That's a difficult placement. So they're all all of Pluto will be in Aquarius for 20 years. Uranus only has a few more years in Taurus. Jupiter is only 1 year in a sign. Saturn is more than halfway through Pisces. So was those planets, those far planets enter new signs, it's going to go click, 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 and it'll be this whole series of synchronicities aligning. And as Saturn enters Aries, which is the sign that follows Pisces, Neptune will be doing the same thing. So Saturn and Neptune in very, very close tandem are going to enter Aries. Aries is the first sign of the zodiac, and it's all about new beginnings. So we're right there. And what those will be is something that some can speculate about, but there's a probability curve already there, but it's not absolute. The future is probable, but not certain. So it kind of remains to this day that our free will is a co-creative factor. So you said it beautifully. We need to focus on positivity. Positivity is largely unity, compassion, forgiveness, love, as opposed to fear. So it's not just superficial to think that. So but you know, how one interprets those feelings, there are those who are called to take a stand and those who are called to take a side, you know, and so there's a lot going on, and from one nation to the next and one city to the next. You know, before we go today, maybe we can do more on another part. I know again, it sort of feels somewhat important sometimes to offer this background, this, you know, this cosmology, this bigger understanding. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, we did that. What I wanted to talk about, admittedly, is that you can see people through planetary types. And I'll go through it really quickly like this. There's solar types are very in their astrology. If you haven't beyond all signs or anything, their sun is very strong. Okay, the sun in the principles of how astrology works is strong. It's funny to say that because like the sun can be stronger in one person's chart than another person's chart. And so the sun is really, so solar types, for example, will be very yang energy. They're the performers, the leaders. They're bright, brilliant, warm, generous, charismatic, creative, extroverted, majestic, sovereign, leaders, energetic, attention-getting, heightened objectivity, literal, factual, showy, playful, extroverted, passionate, proactive. Those are just some keywords because we're talking about the sun. The principle is in the phenomenal. So this is where it gets interesting. The phenomenal reality of the sun and what it is in the sky and all of its dynamics, those words that we can use to describe the sun become psychological, and it works exactly like that. Astrology is natural psychology. So you go, oh, that person's very solar, very brilliant, very showy, very charismatic, very attractive, very like, wow, like, okay. Negatively, they can be superior, controlling, dominating, intense, searing, belittling, arrogant, narcissistic. That would be the negative side. So we're all subject. A person who's Moon, okay, they're very lunar, okay, types, very yin, healers, support workers. And by the way, we're really a mixture of all of them, like that, but it's a question of degree. All right. By our core nature, we can flip from being more solar to more lunar. And some people are very what's called solely lunar, but and there is some people are more balanced than other people. It doesn't make them better, but they are. But some people they really pronounce, let's say, the sun, and that can they still are trying to achieve a certain state of balance, but their sun energy's way higher than other people's, and they'll be way more energetic, way more charismatic, way more everything. Okay, so by sync, meaning not that they're choosing to be, it's just the way it is. It's not like some
Right.
choice that people are going,
Maybe
what
before
is
they
it?
were born.
They're like, yeah, but the moment they were born, at least they're like brighter, like stronger, but they can be really arrogant and narcissistic and insensitive, and that's so it has its downside. A lunar types will be subtle, subdued, shy, reflective, empathic, sympathetic, compassionate, emotional, nurturing, protective, maternal, soft, introverted, familial, subjective as opposed to objective, relative, kind of cool in a way, but they're the nurses, okay, they're the healers, they're the empaths. Negatively, they're like lunar, they're like lunatic, or they have lunacy in the extreme reach of having a very strong moon prominent. That person could be very moody, passive, passive aggressive, overly emotional, unstable, inferior, reactive, cold, indifferent, self-absorbed, picky, hypercritical are some of the words. Some of the words may not seem obvious to people why those words would be true. It's a little difficult that way, but generally those work if we got closer to the principles of astrology. So you can see some people are very solar, some people are very lunar, some are balanced. But okay, so you can use the planets alone when you understand the principles to see them, and you're no longer thinking of them as Aries or Leo or Pisces or whatever. You're seeing them planetarily. And that cuts through a whole bunch of stuff. It almost balances all the systems of astrology. All of them, all systems of astrology have one thing in common: the planets. The Chinese has 5 elements as opposed to 4. And so on, and it just goes on and on. But the planets in particular. So when you use this planetary symbolism, and it's literally the words come from the phenomenology. Now, the sun and moon is kind of easy, and or even with the earth, they're kind of earthy types. Okay, now that's a little bit salt of the earth types. They're more,
Mhm.
but you can get into a whole series of words like that. What would be the strengths? What would be the weaknesses? Or they'd be very mercurial. Mercury, for example, very mercurial. They're the communications people. They're interested in, like, the truck drivers all over the highway, in a way, are ironically mercurial. Keywords: witty, versatile, flexible, resourceful, intellectual, intelligent, creative intelligence, clever, communicative, curious, student teacher, knowledge oriented, experiential, experimental. Now, you kind of, some might go, well, I don't know why Mercury would be experiential, experimental. I'd appreciate that. Okay, it's a little bit of borrowing from a deeper understanding of astrology. It's true, but some of the keywords are there. At worst, they become narrow-minded, projecting, dual or two-faced, gossipy, nosy, know-it-all types. That, like, there's in other words, there's one thing to have knowledge and insight, information to share, versus know-it-all means they're closed-minded, right? There's nothing you can say that they're interested in, that so it's a bit connected to the solar types. It just so happens Mercury, there's a whole saying in astrology, there's poetry, like the sun and moon are called the eyes of God, because like, and just because there's the two lights, they call them the lights. To the Mercury and Venus, which are the inner planets, have been described as the moons of the sun, because they neither have moons, but they're they're the only two planets inside, closer to the sun, and then the moon goes around us, so it goes closer to the sun and then further away and closer. Like, that's kind of cool.
Mhm.
And it bridges to Mars, which is the first planet beyond. So anyway, you can go through, and we didn't do it as much, and perhaps we could. And again, I'm writing an article, so I could also just have it there, but without getting too descriptive, we don't need to. But I'll say it very quickly. You can have Martian types. Okay, what Venus types would
We
be.
gotta go.
We gotta go. Okay, we gotta go. Yeah, you can get into this
So
whole idea
sorry.
description. That's all right. I know you know what? We just might have to do a part two, but
We
you know,
definitely will.
that would be a good one on this, and we'll just take it straight up from looking straight at them, because we've done this background and we did take a while, but I think
Yeah,
there was
let's do that, and we will talk about it, and we'll share it with everyone
yeah,
once we get the dates down. Thanks
yeah,
so much for
yeah.
joining me, Michael.
Okay, you're welcome, Jill.
Thank you for joining us for the U World Order Showcase podcast. Remember, if you would like to be featured on this podcast as a life, health, or transformational coach, please visit www.jointheuworldorder.com. We look forward to talking to you next time as we present another life, health, or transformational coach being the change they seek in the world.